everybody. Welcome to today's edition of the Gamut Network. I mean, just look at the delight that we have on the show today. I am so excited to speak with Becky. Becky has such a beautiful mission and story, and one that certainly needs to be told. So with that, hi, Becky.
Hi.
Nice to
Thanks for having me.
So let's start from the beginning, which we always do, because I think it's important to give our viewers the backstory, get to know you better. So take us back to the journey of Becky.
Absolutely. So I always usually start with the fact that I am someone with dwarfism behind the camera. Sometimes it's hard to tell these days, and I'm proud to identify as part of the disability community. I come from a family where there is no history of dwarfism. So when I was born back in 1984, there weren't a ton of resources because it was before you could easily find information on the internet. And my parents were not sure what that meant when I was born, and most doctors in the hospital where I was born didn't know what that would mean. But there was one nurse who educated the doctors because she had seen one other little person be born before in that hospital. And one of the reasons why this is so common is there are only 30,000 people with dwarfism in the United States, and there are over 400 types.
400 types of dwarfism.
Yes.
Now, is there another disability or disease or condition that has the same effects as dwarfism but is not called dwarfism? I'm shocked by that number. That's the backstory of my question.
I think
thought it'd be more than that.
So one of the types of dwarfism is OI, osteogenesis imperfecta. And I think there may be some crossover where maybe some people may not identify because they may be over 4'10", which is the requirement for dwarfism, or the maximum height of most people with dwarfism. So I don't think other than that, I think there are some cultures where there are just really short people, but they're still considered short average height people.
Absolutely. You know what's so interesting? We had somebody on the show with that yesterday.
Wow.
We had the interview. So that's very interesting that you just brought that up. I have a couple questions up into where you stopped with the story. Did your parents know in advance that you had dwarfism? So out you came. And as a baby, was it easily to identify that you had dwarfism? Was your head larger than your body? What were the signs?
It's funny because I look at pictures and I don't really see the big difference, but you can see some of the facial features even now as an adult. Some of the facial features, like the kind of nose that goes like this, and I always joke to the kids when I'm speaking at schools that I looked like a caricature, but it's a little over-exaggerating. I did have some breathing troubles. They weren't sure if I would make it through the night. So I think some of those things that were coming up, and it could happen to any newborn baby, but there were just signs where there was something that didn't seem quote unquote normal.
Got it. And so this nurse educated, it sounds like even the doctors, on what dwarfism was, and that she felt that you had it. Is there genetic testing that then happened to confirm that's what?
I think so. Yeah. So my parents did, this is another part of the story that I often tell. A few days after we were released from the hospital, my parents went to another hospital to consult a geneticist. And at that time, there may have been some genetic testing. But one of the hardest parts about that experience was my parents arrived to the hospital. They checked in with the receptionist, and the receptionist told them to follow the signs that say birth defects. They said, follow the hallway, the signs that say birth defects, go into the elevator. There's a button for the floor that says birth defects. Then there's going to be another sign that says birth defects, and you'll know you're in the office to meet your genetic counselor. And they're like, well, why can't you just call it a genetic counselor?
Yeah, I am absolutely floored by that. Isn't that? And I hope that we've come a long way since then. I hope if you go visit that hospital now that they've changed that?
So right after, my parents did write a letter and they got the signs to change, because no parent should have to be told that their child has birth defects.
Absolutely, absolutely. So then your parents obviously confirmed, they, went on this journey that was unexpected,
Yes.
which I can absolutely relate to, because that was
Right.
our journey as well. Muscular dystrophy was not in our family. We had no idea that's what he had. And so now your path changed. And so then take us from that point.
So they did a lot of research. My dad had a sibling in the medical profession, and all he was able to offer my father was a brochure. So he didn't even being in the profession, didn't have any information. And it took finding out about this doctor in Baltimore, Maryland. I grew up in the Boston area. There's a doctor in Baltimore, Maryland, who is known to be a specialist in dwarfism. My parents were willing to drive down there, but the hardest part was getting an appointment. And the way that they were able to get an appointment was by signing me up for a sleep study, because they were doing a research project. And that allowed us to go down to Baltimore, do the sleep study, and then get an appointment with this doctor. He had a room completely full of patients, which he always did, but he saw the white ghostly look on my parents' face, and he brought them in immediately to his office and said, "Lay it all out. Tell me everything that's on your mind, and I'm going to try to help ease your mind." And then after that, my parents said, if we ever have to wait 8 hours even for appointments, we will do it, because he saved our anxiety at that time. And I continued to go to that doctor, even though I would see a regular specialist once a year, or a pediatrician, but they just don't know the same that someone who dedicates their entire life. And I often use this comparison even with fashion, where like people don't necessarily go into the field because it's a small market. So they don't think to just customize specifically for like something so specific as dwarfism, because you are at the risk of not having a ton of patients, especially starting off, until you become a trusted source.
And I think that's a really important point, across the board with disability.
Yes.
And that's probably why his waiting room was so filled, is because people shared and said he's the best and that's who you have to go to. And it's a very, very loyal and vocal population. And this is something that I definitely worked into my presentations with the brands about the amazement of this population, that when something works or somebody's good at what they do, if you build it, they will come. I mean, it is that simple. So now tell us like a little bit about school, high school. What was it like for you?
So that doctor had recommended that my parents try their best to stay in their professions or the location of where we were, to limit the amount of potential bullying. So if I become known within my community, in my hometown, and don't move out of that hometown, it's a safer space than moving around throughout. And I know not all families can control that, but that was a piece of advice that my parents took very seriously. And they made sure that I had a friend who was in my class from preschool to 7th grade. So she was a potential ally throughout those years. So if someone were to come up and try to make fun of me, she would be able to say, "Hey, stop that." And because of that, I don't remember being bullied in those earlier years. And I'm sure people make comments, but I just either couldn't hear them, or they were respectful enough having an ally who was in my presence, and they weren't going to say anything with her being there.
Do you think we've gotten better as a culture? Do you think somebody, a little Becky out there that maybe is in middle school needs an ally?
Yes, I think a lot of schools, at least some programs that I've sought out over the past 7 years through my speaking, there have been some educational programs on different types of disabilities in each grade based on kind of comprehension level. And then in middle school, there's usually a speaker with a disability. So it's trying to get at the kids as early as possible to educate them. And it starts with how they're raised in the household.
Agreed.
And if your parents aren't able to accept your disability, it's going to be harder for others in the community to do the same.
Agreed. So when did you start speaking? And was there a moment that you said, you know what, I can do something about this. I can make it easier for those growing up in the world now. Did you have an aha moment?
I constantly am trying to beg my parents for stories of things that I don't remember but want to add to my storytelling. And my parents were a resource in our community, especially after advocating for changing the signs at the hospital. And they were alerted whenever someone with dwarfism was born in the eastern Massachusetts region. And there was one family who said they don't want to bring it home. Like they didn't want to bring their child home from the hospital. And it was heart-wrenching for my parents to hear. And I think that just led to many other things that affected self-esteem, and because it really starts in the household. And I think just kind of hearing some stories like that, there's a lot going on with just within the community. If you read about different drugs that are being researched and limb lengthening, it's controversial topics that kind of get away from the whole having pride in how you were born. And there are just different things that continue to come up. And I think also going back to the fact that 80% of people with dwarfism are born into average height families. You never know which family someone's going to be born into. And then I think because I had that benefit of staying in the same school system, I want to give back to those families that can't really control that because they have to move different places for different jobs. But even in the same school system, going from elementary to middle school, you're meeting twice the amount of people who've never met you before. But kind of just observing those scenarios. In high school, I wrote a junior statement, which is what you write to then apply to colleges. And in the junior statement, I did write that I wanted to be a part-time motivational speaker. I had delivered a leadership speech for Junior Honor Society. I wrote the speech because I was asked to do it, but I wasn't really thinking about speaking at that point in time. But then in college, I founded a Toastmasters club. So really focused on trying to learn the skills to be a good speaker before going out there. And then after college, I really just wanted to use my degree in marketing. Didn't really think about speaking for about 5 years. And then it started to come up that there needs to be a voice to advocate for people like me. And I started hearing from parents of little people at different meetings that their children were struggling. And I offered to go in and talk to the administrators to help them understand the accommodations I had growing up, making it known that that child may not ask for the same things that I did, but at least provide that environment so they feel empowered to ask what they may need. And then speak to the whole student body, have people ask me the hard questions rather than pointing out the child with a disability. But I always get a little starstruck when it comes to the Q&A session and that person with a disability asks me a question in front of all their peers, because I know that something worked. Absolutely. And they feel empowered to be confident.
And you are also not only empowering the person, the little person, but you are also empowering others to expand their education of who little people are. They're just like you and I. I mean, that's really the basis of everything, certainly what we're doing with the Gamut Network, and you are obviously a prime example of that. Now, I know you're also very involved in the Little People of America, also from a fashion perspective. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do with that organization?
Yes. So early on, my parents were resources to other families who had dwarfism come into their family, but I never really got involved in the Little People of America organization until I was in college. It kind of was one of those points where it's like, all right, maybe I'm ready, because just fitting in socially was challenging in high school and my college years. So having that extra resource, it was good timing. Of course, going back, I always think, oh, it would have been fun to be involved when I was younger if I knew I could be friends with all these awesome people who have a lot in common and a lot of similar passions. And I, of course, just kind of stepped my foot into it, didn't really get involved for several years. And then I was living in New York City and I was asked to run the chapter because they have districts and chapters around the country to keep people engaged. So I got voluntold I was going to run the chapter. And then I found out that the fashion show that happens at the conference every summer, there's a week-long conference in a different city every summer. One of the events is a fashion show, and people said, like, there's no one to run it because the other people who were running it before stepped down. We may just have to get rid of it. And I thought, you cannot get rid of the fashion show. It's like one of the biggest events that allows all of these kids, of even people of all ages, to feel wonderful, and they get to pick out their outfits. And so my friend Lauren and I decided that we were going to take this initiative and figure out how to do something different with it, so it didn't feel bland, like everyone was saying, like, oh, it's this 2-hour show, we're just sitting through, just watching people walk down, and there's really no narrative. So we wanted to add the narrative piece where we have people answer questions of, like, what does beauty mean to you? How does your outfit make you feel? And we do talk about what they're wearing, but it's more of just like, what's the whole picture?
And what are they wearing?
So there, a lot of people, it's just what they're figuring out what works for them within their communities. A lot of people like wearing dresses. Then
so is it their
guys
own
are wearing, so yes.
Okay, is their own product?
So there are some people who've dabbled into the space who have asked some of the models to wear their clothing, but we try to keep it like, you decide what you want to wear, so we don't get involved in any of like how much people have to pay. I think one of the biggest things is the financial. Everyone's in a different place, and you just want to make them feel empowered to participate. So we've been doing it for several years. Lauren and I both participated as participants just because we had friends who were participating and they said, we need more models. So we participated in DC in 2013, and then in 2014, I think, was when we took it over and said, we're not letting this go away. And then we continue to reach out, try to get as many people to participate. This past year, we had to do virtual. So we had people use their sidewalks as the runway and tell us how they were feeling. And it's really just continuing to make people feel positive about what we have to bring to society.
Absolutely. Now, one thing I want to dive into a little bit for our viewers is the complexity of products for the little people population. Because I've, often been asked, can't you do something for this population? And there's absolutely nothing I'd want to do more. And I've definitely been working with some designers that have dwarfism to help guide them and shape this. But even as you just educated me, there's 400 different types of dwarfism.
And even within the type, so I had 2 other people with achondroplasia who were bridesmaids in my wedding, completely different body types than I have, and another person with another type of dwarfism. Some people look a little bit more proportionate, so then they look like children. But one of the challenges is, actually, I had a friend who was a foot shorter than I am, and he was definitely shopping in the kids' clothing sections, but he would go pick out a sweater and he'd really like it, but then he'd find out in the back there's a big truck. So it was a little challenging because he was really into his fashion. I think what has worked for me, I wear a lot of dresses and I avoid dresses with pockets, and I try to get, if they're above the knee length on average height people, but kind of come to mid leg for me. And it's just like trying to find capri leggings or 3/4 length shirts. So I've just historically tried to find things that already exist. And then ideally I like to just fit in them as they are. I haven't even been to a tailor except for my wedding dress in 6.5 years, but I think it's just tired of having to pay for the extra cost. Sometimes getting pants altered or costs more, and it really is. It's a body type. I think I have a Tupperware container of goal pants, so those things that I've gotten altered in the past and just have not made work. But I was like, I don't know if I do get to that place, if I'll want to pay to get alterations again, so I'll just keep them for now. But then things go out of style, and it's very challenging. But I would say the hardest thing is trying to wrap your head around it. Same with the doctors, like not knowing if they'll get the credibility to be a trusted source. And I think it's fun to watch those people because there are people with dwarfism who may have additional mobility disabilities. So there are things that are already being made that are helping people, regardless of trying to meet the needs of the entire population.
Absolutely. And look, I think there's a space and a place to have product that is the sizing of children, but the style of adults. Exactly. And I think that commitment to understanding that there's a whole population of people out there that require this and want the dignity of not shopping in the children's department has such value. So that's certainly something that I'm educating, advocating for within the population. Is it going to be perfect for every little person? Absolutely not. But the movement of adaptive is not perfect for every disability. But does it make their life easier? You bet. Does it feel good that the industry is saying you matter and you're important? You bet. So that is absolutely something that working with the brands on.
I think one of the biggest things that's refreshing is finding things that can fit well rather than the bagginess. We struggle a little bit, like I have a big butt and boobs, so children's clothes don't necessarily work for me, but I still need something in like petite sizes. But I think we've gotten away from the days where you see this, but long ago at conventions you would see boys be wearing these really long pants or shorts to look like pants, but they were just so baggy, and they didn't even look like bell bottoms. But I think people have gotten better. So if I do get pants altered, I like to get the length altered, but I also try to get it pinned in the back, so it's not that the back is sticking out.
It's the complexity is there, but it is surmountable. There's no question about it, and it just requires getting the buy-in from the industry that this is a population that matters, that is growing, that is important, and that is obviously a commitment that certainly we make to you, that is on the agenda of importance, as well as footwear. The footwear is so
wide, short and wide, 5 wide, Payless is. I was very upset when Payless went down because, and I think I can still get some of them on Amazon, but just the 5 wide, and they still aren't the best support, but it's just find something that's wide enough. Some of us just like, obviously, comfort. When I was really young, I did have some inserts in my shoes, so it was kind of embarrassing when the sneakers would stick out like this, but I had to do what was the best support. Sneakers have been a little easier to find more recently, or tennis shoes, as most people say. But I would say, looking at our community, I would try to think of it as like how Nordstrom and some other stores have the in-house alterations. So try to empower people to find what works for them and then help them make it look good.
I couldn't agree more, because feeling good, looking good, all interchangeable. So before we go, I'd like to add.
And just one more quick story. When I was with Sean, who was in your show, we went out to Long Island for a fashion show at Lord & Taylor, at one of the Lord & Taylor locations on Long Island. And this group of people were assigned to us to help us find an outfit for that next day that we would be going down the runway. And right when we got into the store, Sean just was so embarrassed for me. There was this lady that immediately said to me, "What are we going to do with you?" She basically was like, "We're not going to find anything that works for you in this store." So going with that mindset the minute I get in the door was like, this is a turnoff. And then we get into the dressing room and she puts all my clothes up on the hook in the dressing room, but I'm not going to be able to reach it once.
It's being mindful, right? It's just knowing your customer. It's being, understanding that you're a beautiful woman that wants an experience like everybody else. And I think thank you for sharing that, because I think that's a really important piece. So before we go, I'd like to ask all of my guests one final question. And that is something I firmly believe in, and that's the power of a vision board and manifesting what you want to happen in your life. So whether you have a physical one or not, or you keep it in your heart or your head, if we got to peek onto Becky's vision board, what would we see?
Well, I keep putting this out there into the universe. I do want to be an author of a book that I want to title Just Call Me Becky, because people get so caught up in the terminology, and I just want people to talk to me like a human and others like me. I've thought about maybe hosting a podcast so I can hear other people's stories and share it with the world, people who I find interesting. I am really excited that we just bought a house. So we do want to grow a family. So that would be on the vision board. Australia's on my list. I really wanted to study abroad there in college, but didn't get the chance to do that, and would like to still get there somehow once this pandemic ends.
It will, and it's not going anywhere. So that's good news. I love, go ahead. I think there's
and I have a niece and a nephew and other nieces as well who I just want to continue to set an example for them so they don't have any fears or doubts in the future about what they're capable of, and reaching out to audiences who don't think that they need disability inclusion in their life because it doesn't hit their life. But more people, I don't like preaching to the choir. I rather talk to people that don't think they need that education and empower them to do more.
Absolutely. I love all of them. And I have no doubt that you are going to do them all. And I can't wait to be on the sidelines cheering you on.
Thank you. I'm so glad we had the chance to have this conversation.
I am as well. And thank you so much for joining us. It's always so fascinating to learn. And that's the piece that you just spoke about. Everybody needs education all the time. And so thank you for being an advocate and sharing that with the world. So
it's okay. It's okay to admit that you don't know. And we're here to teach you. Ask questions rather than making assumptions, and you'll learn so much.
Agreed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you would like to be on the Gamut Network, please email us at talent@gamutmanagement.com to tell us why you'd be a great guest. Please also follow us on our YouTube channel at the Gamut Network, as well as our social handles of Gamut Management. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye.